The idea that you can just decouple completely is a very dangerous one. And that is one of the potential dangerous consequences, by the way, of what President Trump is doing now. He's pushing China into a decoupling. And if he thinks that by being very tough on China, he's going to bring China to the table, I'm not sure he's reading Chinese political psychology right.
Well, if that was the background on the economics and the things that are moving the markets from Mohammed Al-Arian, let's now speak to Sir Simon Fraser, who is the former head of the diplomatic service, to try and work out where politics and diplomacy goes next. Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, Sir Simon, we were hearing there from Mohammed Al-Arian. One of the things he said is the calculation that governments must now make about Donald Trump. If we can't trust you now, can we trust you in the future? Can diplomacy work in an environment like this one?
Well, it is really difficult when you have a sort of roller coaster of political decision making and market reaction for governments to know how to respond. But I think with the United States, whatever people feel about the decisions that President Trump is making, the fact is the United States is the United States. And we all have to deal with the United States, and the British government will continue to try to do that and to try to protect national interests in that relationship. But I think also, if they have sense, and I very much hope they're doing this, they will be thinking strategically longer term about the alternatives to the very high dependence on the United States that this country has had in a number of fields over many, many years. It's sad to say that, but that's the sort of evolution we're looking at.
And would that look like a closer economic tie with China?
Well, I think it would look, first of all, in my view, like aligning more closely with our fellow Europeans on a whole range of issues that face us. And then looking also to those other countries in Asia Pacific that President Trump is actually threatening with very high tariffs. The countries that President Biden was actually trying to get closer to support his policy on China. And then thirdly, as you say, there's the question of China itself. Our government has taken a fairly pragmatic approach to economic links with China since it came in. But we'll have to look at that carefully. There is a big risk, of course, that if China can't trade with the United States in the future, there'll be a diversion of Chinese trade into other markets, and that could pose a lot of problems for us. So there are opportunities, but there are also risks there.
I mean, is there a risk here too that there could be a swing almost too much in one direction? I think that's probably what you're getting close to there. But there are a lot of people now saying, well, look, China wants to trade with us. China does a lot of trade. It's the second biggest economy in the world. We should shun America and move much more closely to China. I mean, is there still a threat or a risk there, as the last government thought, in doing that kind of deal with China?
Yes, and I wouldn't advocate that. I mean, let's be clear. China has distorted the international trade system. You may not agree with how President Trump is approaching this issue, but his fundamental argument that China distorts trade and exploits, for example, the subsidies of state-owned enterprises unfairly is a strong argument. So we shouldn't veer from one to the other. In any case, the United States is a historic ally of the UK, but we have to deal with China because China is the second biggest economy in the world. And in my view, the idea that you can just decouple completely is a very dangerous one. And that is one of the potential dangerous consequences, by the way, of what President Trump is doing now. He's pushing China into a decoupling. And if he thinks that by being very tough on China, he's going to bring China to the table, I'm not sure he's reading Chinese political psychology right.
What do you think will happen next in that case?
Well, it's interesting. I still think that there is a prospect of negotiation between the two of them. But do bear in mind, since President Trump came in, there hasn't been a meeting or even a phone call between him and President Xi. So there would be an awful lot of work to do to get this moving in the right direction. I don't discount it. But meanwhile, we've also got this fact that we've only got a 90-day pause on the other tariffs that have been threatened by the United States. So there's still a lot of moving parts ahead, which creates uncertainty for business, for markets and for investors, and indeed for consumers. So it's a tricky situation looking forward.
And for politicians too, who are trying to steer us through this. We've seen the government's position, albeit a gently, softly approach in some ways. It has swung. We heard last week that the 10% tariff was a win because of our diplomatic efforts. We've now seen that that's probably not true in reality. That's not what the tariffs were about. If you were advising the government now, what would you advise the best approach be? given that we know that Donald Trump can swing wildly from one thing to another, you've outlined the risks on China. Where should the UK realistically be positioning itself in all of this?
Well, on the United States, I would advise them to continue to negotiate, if they can, to get some sort of trade arrangement with the US, and also not to overreact and cut relations with America in a way that could damage the UK. So broadly continue that policy, although I agree with you, it's a bit exaggerated to suggest that we've had wild success with it so far. We still have this 10% tariff in place. But beyond that, I'd say that may be a tactical opportunity, but we've got to look at the strategic dilemma for the UK, which is in the long term, if America continues to behave like this, where do our long-term interests lie? And I do think that pushes you towards, a more serious re-engagement with Europeans, starting particularly on the defence and security agenda, where we have this immediate crisis in Ukraine, and then thinking more broadly about how we develop relations around the world with other democracies and middle-sized democracies like us who believe in an international system of open trade and the rule of law and want to preserve that sort of international society.
Well, I'm sure they will have been listening to you. Sir Simon Fraser, many thanks for your time.
U.S. President Donald Trump on Wednesday announced he would pause his reciprocal tariffs on many countries for 90 days, but he raised tariffs further on imports from China. The announcement came less than 24 hours after steep new tariffs kicked in on imports from dozens of trading partners.
Well, I thought that people were jumping a little bit out of line. They were getting yippy, they were getting a little bit yippy, a little bit afraid.
U.S. stocks surged following the announcement, with the benchmark S&P 500 climbing more than 9%. Trump's tariffs had hammered markets, raised the odds of recession, and prompted retaliatory responses from China and the European Union. Trump said he would raise the tariff on Chinese imports to 125%, from the 104% level that took effect at midnight, further escalating a high-stakes confrontation between the world's two largest economies. He said he would at the same time suspend targeted tariffs on other countries for 90 days to allow time for U.S. officials to negotiate with countries that have sought to reduce them. A 10% blanket duty on almost all U.S. imports will remain in place.
Nothing's over yet, but we have a tremendous amount of spirit from other countries, including China. China wants to make a deal. They just don't know how quite to go about it. It's one of those things they don't know how quite. They're proud people. And President Xi's a proud man. I know him very well, and they don't know quite how to go about it, but they'll figure it out. They're in the process of figuring it out, but they want to make a deal.
This is chaos. This is government by chaos.
The top Democrat in the U.S. Senate, Chuck Schumer, blamed Trump for hurting the country, but said he was gratified by the president's latest move.
Donald Trump is feeling the heat from Democrats and across America about how bad these tariffs are. He is reeling, he is retreating, and that is a good thing. We are going to continue to put the heat on him because there are still much damaging tariffs in place.
Since Trump announced broad tariffs late on April 2nd, stocks had fallen more than 12% for their biggest four-day sell-off in 5 years.